In the year 1941, the Jews of Eastern Europe were being massacred by the thousands. Amid the chaos, carnage and bloodshed, 3 brothers managed to escape certain death and take refuge in the dense forests they had known since childhood. There, they began their desperate battle against the Nazis. The brothers turned a primitive struggle to survive into something far more consequential, a way to avenge the deaths of their loved ones by saving thousands of others. At first, it was all they could do to survive and stay alive. But gradually, as whispers of their daring exploits spread, they began to attract others, men and women, young and old, willing to risk everything for the sake of even a moment's freedom. As the brutal winter descended, they worked to create a community and to keep faith alive when all humanity appeared to be lost. Join me as we follow the exploits and explore the fascinating story of Tuvia Bielski and his brothers, Jewish partisans who dared to defy the iron fist of Hitler and the Nazi regime. This is an epic tale of family, honor, vengeance, and salvation. It was early in 1943, and the Novograd ghetto was buzzing with whispers. There were rumors of an impending Nazi raid, rumors that the ghetto would be liquidated, which was a code word for the mass murder of all Jews living inside its walls. When war broke out between Germany and the Soviet Union in June 1941, there had been over 6,000 Jews in Novograd. In December 1941, all these Jews were forced into a ghetto. Between July 1941 and May 1943, the Jews of Novograd were murdered in a series of Nazi raids, dwindling the Jewish population from over 6,000 down to less than 300. This small but draggled group of Jews were determined to survive. As rumors of a final liquidation of the camp increased, leaders in the community decided that they needed to act in order to save themselves. However, escape seemed like an impossible dream. The ghetto was guarded around the clock by a unit of armed Nazi soldiers. In addition, the entire ghetto was surrounded by 2 walls. Even if 1 or 2 of the ghetto inmates could manage to make it past the guards and walls and barbed wire, it was impossible for all of them to escape. And the Nazi policy was to kill everyone left behind in the event that a handful did manage to leave. If the Jews of Novograd ghetto were to escape, then they needed to make sure that no one was left behind. Finally, they decided that their only option was to tunnel out of the ghetto. Choosing the space under someone's bed as the entry point of the tunnel, a group of 50 diggers began to slowly shovel their way under the ghetto. Finally, after months of digging and a spate of challenges, the tunnel was ready. On the 26th of September 1943 at 9 p.m, the first Jews slipped through the entrance of the tunnel and disappeared into the depths of the earth. Realizing that something was amiss, the guards sounded the alarm and began to open fire indiscriminately. But by this time, many of the evacuees were emerging on the other side of the tunnel, outside of the ghetto walls, breathing in their first taste of freedom. One of them, a young 14-year-old girl, stumbled into the dark, moonless night. It was raining, and the sounds of gunfire and the barking of attack dogs surrounded her in the distance. Seeing a farmhouse, she made a run for it. She hid in the outhouse sitting in it for hours, too fearful to sleep, listening to the shouts and the gunshots and the dogs. Finally at dawn, when the activity had died down, she decided to run to the forest. She had heard of a group of Jewish resistance fighters, partisans who lived in the forest, defending themselves against Nazi attacks, scavenging for food, and above all else, refusing to bow to the tyranny of the Nazi machine. After hours of wandering, the girl stumbled onto the camp in the Nalabaki forest in western Belarus. She was welcomed with open arms, given food and a place to stay. She had reached the campsite of the Bielski Partisans, a group of 1,200 Jews led by the Bielski brothers, determined to survive the war. When the Nazis rose to power in 1933, their leader, Adolf Hitler, had only two agenda items in mind. The first was to create a German superstate that dominated Europe and the world. The second was to systematically eradicate the Jewish race from the face of the earth. Quietly, he began to put in place measures to separate, exclude, and expel Jews from every facet of German society. Germans were ordered to boycott Jewish businesses, and Jews were systematically removed from civil service. Then, in November 1938, Herschel Greenspan, a Polish-German Jew living in France, shot and killed Ernest von Rath, a German diplomat living in Paris. Greenspan was seeking revenge for the German treatment of Jews, including his own family, who had been forced into exile in Poland. Soon after von Rath's death, Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister in charge of propaganda, ordered mob violence. This took the form of what was later known as the Kristallnacht pogrom, or the Night of Broken Glass. During Kristallnacht, German paramilitary troops and Hitler Youth units burned, looted, and vandalized thousands of Jewish homes, stores, and synagogues. Soon after this, 30,000 Jewish men were arbitrarily arrested and sent to concentration camps. Then, on the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, kicking off World War II. By June of 1940, Germany had invaded and occupied Denmark, Norway, Belgium, northern France, and the Netherlands. Then, in June 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded the Soviet Union. However, Hitler's ever-expanding empire held an increasing number of Jews, and he soon began to look for ways to deal with what he referred to as the Jewish problem. His deadly response became known as the final solution. Jews across Europe were labelled with yellow stars and herded into ghettos or shipped off to concentration camps to be exterminated. Today, we are familiar with the harrowing images of emaciated Jews peering through wide fencing and the leering smokestacks of death camps like Auschwitz, where millions of Jews were murdered. These images are deeply disturbing and give us a glimpse into what the human heart is capable of at its worst. But one aspect of Jewish history during World War II that is overlooked or more often unknown is the story of Jewish partisans who defied the Nazi war machine. Many of these partisans occupied the forests of western Belarus within the Soviet Union, and the most successful of these groups that saved the most Jewish lives during World War II was the Bielski Partisans, or the Bielski Partisans. The Bielskis were a poor peasant family based in the village of Stankiewicz in western Belarus. The father, David Bielski, owned a small mill, farmed the land, and kept some livestock. His wife, Biela, gave birth to 12 children, 10 sons and 2 daughters. The Bielskis lived in a small 2-roomed hut and were the only Jewish family living in Stankiewicz. On the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west. 16 days later, on the 17th of September, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. The military invasion lasted 3 weeks, until on the 6th of October 1939, the entire territory of the Second Polish Republic was divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. For many Jews in the eastern part of the Polish Republic, the arrival of the Red Army was a welcome sight. They were glad to see Soviets because they would shield them from the far greater terror of Nazi hatred towards Jews. But their sense of relief was short-lived. 9 months later, in June 1941, Germany declared war on the Soviet Union. The German onslaught against the Soviet Union was as unexpected as it was sudden, taking Soviet authorities and civilians by surprise. To escape the Luftwaffe raids, Tuvia and Zus Bielski, David and Biela Bielski's sons, fled to the family home in Stankiewicz with their families. As the situation unfolded and the Germans gained the upper hand, most Jews began to realize that time was running out. The 1st German Army unit rolled into Stankiewicz on the 1st of July 1941. They chose the Bielskis' farmland to set up camp and set up their headquarters in the backyard of the family's small home. At first, the Germans appeared friendly, but soon they issued orders demanding that all Jews who were not permanent residents of Stankiewicz immediately evacuate the village on pain of death. Tuvia and his brother Zeus were forced to leave and return to their respective homes. During this time, Tuvia went to the nearby town of Novogrodek to visit his brother Asael. While he was there, both brothers were arrested by the Germans and forced into a labor camp. They managed to escape in the dead of night and vowed that they would never allow themselves to be captured by the Germans again. As the Nazi reign of terror began to sweep over Russia, Jews began to get a taste of what their Western European counterparts had experienced. By the time the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, they had perfected their methods of Jewish extermination. Determined to accelerate the process of Jewish annihilation, they introduced specialized killing units, specially trained to murder Jews. This group, known as the Einsatzgruppen, would follow close on the heels of the advancing army. They would encircle and trap large Jewish population centers before their unsuspecting victims had a chance to figure out what was happening and it was too late to escape. In the massacres that followed, this elite Nazi killing machine was assisted by the German army and local collaborators. By October 1941, Tuvia, Asael and Zus Bielski began to covertly move in and out of society. They spent time with their families, picked up work as casual day laborers on farms, and would hide in the surrounding forests when circumstances posed a threat. But they refused to settle into ghettos. Ghettos were large enclosed districts where Jews were isolated from the rest of society. In order to place Jews in a ghetto, Nazi authorities would follow a familiar pattern. First, Jews were identified and separated from their non-Jewish counterparts. Often their property was confiscated and they were refused employment. Once this phase was completed, they were rounded up and forced into ghettos, where living conditions were appalling. Extreme overcrowding in the confined area led to the outbreak of epidemics, and the abject poverty of the inhabitants led to starvation and often death. towards the end of 1941, the Bielski farm in Stankiewicz was raided by the Germans. The Bielski brothers learned that their parents had been arrested and taken to the Novograd ghetto along with Zus Bielski's wife and baby daughter. Then, on the 7th of December 1941, there was a massive raid at the Novograd ghetto. 4,000 Jews were massacred, and among them were the Bielski's parents and the wives of two of the brothers, Tuvia and Zus. This tragedy was a turning point for the Bielski brothers. Now more than ever, they were determined to concentrate on defying the German army and freeing themselves and those who were dear to them from their clutches. By March 1942, Asael Bielski had gathered 9 fugitive Jews around him in the forest near Novograd. By then, it was impossible to work in exchange for food. This was because the local non-Jewish population was terrified of the severe punishments that would inevitably follow if they were caught assisting or harboring Jews. So, in order to gather food, Asael Bielski's little group began to venture out of the forest at dusk with their guns in their hands, visiting local farmers and asking for food. Bit by bit, they realized that a large group of well-organized, well-armed Jews was the best solution to surviving the Nazi reign of terror. As time progressed and German raids became more aggressive, many Jewish fugitives began to realize that the forest offered them more safety than hiding in sympathetic neighbors' homes. Then, in May 1942, there was another mass murder at the Lida ghetto. Tuvia Bielski urged his friend, Alter Tikhtin, who had survived the murder, to prepare to leave the ghetto with his family. The heavy security surrounding the ghetto made it impossible for Tuvia to infiltrate it. However, he managed to orchestrate Tikhtin's escape from outside the ghetto. Soon Tuvia and his small group of fugitive Jews joined his brother Asael's group, and they fused into a single unit. The group began to increase in size as more and more Jews escaped the surrounding ghettos and joined them. Finally, around May 1942, they decided that they needed to formally organize themselves into a partisan group. Though they went under several different names, they were always known as the Bielski Otriad, under the command of Tuvia Bielski, the oldest of the 3 brothers. What made the Bielski Otriad so unique was their willingness to accept and integrate all Jews who came to them as fugitives, whether they were armed and able-bodied or not. This meant that their group had a high percentage of unarmed women, children, and elderly people who were protected and provided for by those who were able to fight. Most Russian partisans who operated in the forests focused on armed conflict or sabotage against the Germans. But the Bielskis focused more on saving lives. Tuvia Bielski insisted that self-preservation was intricately linked to the preservation of others. He believed that in working to save others, we inevitably save ourselves. Tuvia Bielski often said,
"It was simple. The Germans caught my father, mother, and 2 brothers. They were taken to their death. So would I imitate them by killing some Germans? It didn't pay. To me, it made no sense. I wanted to save, not kill."
However, regardless of their desire to stay away from waging war against the Germans, the Bielski Otriad was asked to cooperate in anti-Nazi raids alongside Russian partisans in the area. These joint military ventures began in the last quarter of 1942 and continued well into 1943. Much of this involved sabotaging railway stations, bridges, telephone lines, and hacking supply trucks. Then, in July 1943, the Germans planned an attack to eliminate the partisans hiding in the Naliboki forest. The Bielski Otriad had set up a semi-permanent camp there and were in danger of being captured and killed. When they heard that the Germans were coming, they hastily abandoned their camp and evacuated onto an island in the middle of a swamp. The evacuation took the group of nearly 700 Jews through dangerous terrain, but all of them managed to make it safely to the island. After weeks of camping out in the swampland, the partisans managed to make it through German lines and evacuate the forest, finding shelter in nearby villages before eventually making it back to the Naliboki forest after the danger had passed. Eventually, the Bielski Otriad grew to 1,200 people, and by the autumn of 1943, they organized themselves into a small shtetl, or town with workshops and a large communal kitchen. By the end of 1943, close to 3 million Polish Jews had been slaughtered. This was about 90% of the pre-war Jewish population. Then on the 6th of June 1944, the Allied forces landed in Normandy, France, and on the 23rd of June, the Red Army opened its great offensive operation targeting the Belarusian and Baltic fronts. As Soviet troops surged forward, Jewish partisans played their part in disrupting the arrival of German reinforcements by destroying vital roads and bridges. Then, in July 1944, the Red Army swept victoriously through Belarus, pursuing the retreating German army and liberating towns on the way. But the war still continued to rage, and the order came down from Soviet authorities for the Bielski Otriad to evacuate their camp and go to Novogrodic, where they would be issued with new identification papers and relocated. There, most of them were enlisted in the Red Army and sent to the front, where they died. Asael Bielski was among these recruits, and he died in Marienburg, Germany, leaving behind his pregnant wife, Chaja. After the war, Tuvia and Zeus, with their families, first settled in Israel and then later relocated to the United States, where they ran a trucking business. Tuvia Bielski was a unique man. In fact, there was no one else quite like him. A Jewish resistance fighter who, during the height of Nazi power, not only defied capture, but saved 1,200 Jews from being murdered as well. He died at the age of 81 in New York, leaving behind his wife Lilka and 3 children. The story of the Bielski partisans is inspiring because of its uniqueness. It's a singularity, an anomaly in an otherwise predictable pattern of massacre and victimization. At a time when Jews were forced to go quietly into the dark night of annihilation, the Bielskis defied the norm and raged against the Nazi killing machine. We live in a world besieged by another master of terror, an invisible being that the Bible in Revelation 12 and verse 7 calls the devil and Satan. He's a master of cruelty and suffering, destroying anyone who places themselves in his power. But we can choose to be part of a small group that actively defies this reign by placing ourselves under the banner of another commander. Listen to what Jesus says in John chapter 16 and verse 33. These things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Jesus offers us hope in a world besieged by uncertainty and fear. Instead of going quietly into the dark night of sin and hopelessness, Jesus lifts up the light of truth and invites us to join his band of partisans, resistance fighters, determined to defy Satan's reign of terror and stand in alliance with God's reign of love and hope. And just as the partisans experienced the joy of freedom, Jesus has promised us freedom too. In Revelation chapter 21 and verse 4, the Bible tells us, He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. We may live in a world besieged by hatred, violence, and hopelessness, but Jesus offers us hope, not just for this world, but for eternity. If you'd like to partner with Jesus today and find that real hope, if you'd like to experience how God is with us even during our darkest and most difficult trials, then I'd like to recommend the free gift we have for all our incredible journey viewers today. It's the booklet, Finding Courage to Meet Life's Challenges. I'm sure you'll want to read this small booklet that explores the big theme of good versus evil in our world today. This booklet is our gift to you and is absolutely free. I guarantee there are no costs or obligations whatsoever. So make the most of this wonderful opportunity to receive the gift we have for you today.
Phone or text 0436 333 555 in Australia or 020 422 2042 in New Zealand, or visit our website tij.tv, or simply scan the QR code on your screen and we'll send you today's free offer totally free of charge and with no obligation. Write to us at GPO Box 274, Sydney, New South Wales 2001 Australia, or PO Box 76673, Manukau, Auckland 2241 New Zealand. Don't delay, call or text us now.
Be sure to join us again next week when we will share another of life's journeys together. Until then, I invite you to join me as we pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the hope and assurance that you give us. Thank you for being right there with us as we face our struggles and challenges every day. We reach out to you today and ask you to guide us on life's pathway. Give us the strength to follow your leading. We ask in Jesus' name, Amen.